cars to excel, but ultimately outside of Dixon, they did not. We saw his teammate a moment ago, Dixon's teammate that is, Philip Sauvage a moment ago in the Alphamar VDS box, and I guess a delight for us all, Neil, at least to see Philip Sauvage leathered up and heading out on track this morning.
Yeah, there were some thoughts as to whether Philip will be fit enough to ride this weekend. That right shoulder that he injured all the way back in Assen was tweaked in a massive moment on Friday at Phillip Island, which led to him withdrawing from the Grand Prix on Saturday. But he has turned up and will attempt to ride this weekend. Let's see how far he gets into it. Caught up with Philip yesterday and he seemed fairly upbeat spirits. So fingers crossed for him. And Guevara will be looking to repeat his feats from 1 year ago here. Took his first ever his first ever Moto2 podium at this circuit 1 year ago. Good to see some of the local fans here in attendance on Friday morning. Hello, Malaysia.
Yeah. Hello to you too. We certainly know they are creative in their support of all things MotoGP in this part of the world. I'm sure it was here, wasn't it, last year ago when we had a fan heralding Jack Appleyard's role as the president of the Tayo Furusato fan club. They show their support in various different ways and fashions here.
Yeah, they certainly do. It's obviously a big spot for, I think, fans from the north of Australia to come up to as well. I think some people from the likes of Perth find that coming to Malaysia is actually a little bit cheaper than going all the way down to Phillip Island. Certainly finding accommodation, I think, is a bit easier in Kuala Lumpur than it is down around Cowes on the island. So usually a decent Australian contingent here as well in the grandstands.
I happen to know that the tickets bought from outside of Malaysia, which does account for a lot of the attendance here, I think around a quarter of those have been snapped up by Aussies for this Grand Prix weekend, of which they will have a couple of riders to cheer for in this Moto2 class. Centre ages, of course, we've already seen Harrison Boyd who continues to take the place of Unai Aradre at the MSI squad. While the session does get underway, I guess while we're on the subject, we might as well just tidy up some other pieces of housekeeping for you. As is always the case here at the Malaysian Grand Prix, we do have two local wildcards. In fact, they're very easy to spot. Petronas branded pit boxes directly opposite us here in the commentary box. Two riders that we have seen before on the Moto2 grid. The number 20 of Azroy Anwar, who did previously wildcard here in 2022 and 2023, and a three-time Asia Road Racing Superbike winner here at Sepang already this year. And teammate to him this weekend, another rider we've seen before. We saw him here last year, Mohamed Helmi Asman, making his second Grand Prix appearance, both part of the Petronas MIE Racing RW squad on board Calyx chassis. So pre-practice one underway, and we guess a wait to see. It won't become clear until we get later into the weekend just how important a session like this might prove to be, because it's fair to say that the weather forecasts, which are always rather temperamental in this part of the world. If you were with us yesterday for the Gear Up show, you'd have seen about 3 changes of weather conditions even during our half-hour broadcast. Myself and Jack Appleyard received a bit of a soaking midway through the show. But there are certainly some forecasts, Neil, that are suggesting that some heavy rain could be heading our way by the time these boys are back out on track for practice this afternoon.
Yeah, you never really know exactly what the weather's going to do here in Malaysia, and I have been struck by how cool it is. Normally when you make your way from the car park over to the media centre in the morning, it's already blazingly hot, very, very humid as well, and you find yourself wiping yourself down with sweat once you get to the media centre. But I have to say, it's not like that at all. I mean, it's not cold by any stretch, but it's certainly a lot cooler than when we normally visit here in Malaysia. I particularly enjoyed during the Gear Up show yesterday. You darting off while the camera was still on you to try and get some shelter while poor Jack was still stuck under the heavens.
I was out of there. I wasn't hanging around in the pouring rain for too much longer. It's certainly beginning to get a bit dark overhead. Manu Gonzalez right now. That's the current championship situation. 2 points finish between the top two. To remind you, we brought it up last weekend when we came on the air in Australia. Manu Gonzalez was 60 points ahead of Diogo Moreira at the summer break point, following Moreira's non-score in Brno, which of course came from a pit lane start. And Manu Gonzalez, the stat remains, as I told you a week ago, Gonzalez has beaten Moreira in a Grand Prix only once since then. And we said that Manu was going to have to go on the attack ultimately in Australia and start thinking about beating Moreira and winning races rather than just managing a World Championship League, which had been slashed by that disqualification in Indonesia. Ultimately, the events of Practice Friday left Manu with no choice but to defend.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good stat that you pointed out there, Lewis. I mean, Gonzalez has just outscored Moreira once in the last 7 races. That was in Barcelona. So he is definitely not having momentum on his side. I guess there's 2 ways to look at his Phillip Island Grand Prix. I mean, you could say that it was another chance where he came up short in a direct fight with Diogo Moreira, and they weren't properly banging bars for a lot of that race. I haven't seen them actually really come up against each other that often in the championship this year, despite the fact that they're both the most prominent riders going for the championship. But from another point of view, you could actually say that Manu Gonzalez actually rescued a decent result from what had been a very, very tricky start to the weekend. Had a massive crash on Friday morning down at the hay shed, dusted himself. Didn't have a great Friday afternoon, but then put it on the front row on Saturday, despite losing all of Saturday morning to try and improve his dry setting because it was a wet session, and then to be up there fighting for the first half of the race at least. On the track that he doesn't necessarily like, I thought was pretty decent going, so I'm inclined to give Manu the benefit of the doubt and think that yeah, we'll probably see something a bit more like his early season self here this weekend. Not sure what you think, Lewis.
Well, how good a result it ultimately was in Australia, I think will be determined by what happens next at Grand Prix venues, which he and the team are saying are much more up Manu Gonzalez's street. Sepang Portimao, where he was on pole last year, and the finale in Valencia, which of course any Spanish rider is going to know like the back of their hands. Say, the way it was looking on Friday, he would have, I think, perhaps signed for maybe not a 7th place, but I think if when Manu Gonzalez was sliding through the Grand Chapter of the Haitian, if he told him there he's still going to the World Championship when we leave Australia, I think he might well have taken that and said, yeah, do you know what, absolutely fine, we'll just set up a 3-race championship now from now to the end of the season. He did still finish ahead of Aaron Canet, and Barry Baltus was only 1 position ahead of him, so only lost 1 point, so it had almost to all intents and purposes, unless both Gonzalez and Moreira non-score this weekend, it's pretty much boiled it down to a 2-horse race in the World Championship. And Manu can put himself, I guess, in a position now where all he has to do is watch Moreira, beat Moreira, and he'll leave the weekend happy.
Yeah, for sure. I think losing just 7 points, I know 7 points are a big amount at this time of the year, but yeah, considering how bleak it was looking at some points during the Phillip Island race weekend and how strong Moreira was on the Friday, perhaps at that particular juncture in the weekend we thought could be a bigger loss for the number 18. So yeah, he's still in the championship lead. I did catch up with him briefly just before he was leaving the track, before the MotoGP race started at Phillip Island, and the guy is just so cool. He's the personification of unflappable. We've said that so often this year, but he was like, yeah, it was a decent race. I was fighting with Diogo at the start, but just lost too much rear tire in that fight, and was really on the ropes in the closing laps. But this isn't a good circuit for me. He was like, just wait until next weekend. I'm pretty confident that everything will come together then. So I think Gonzalez certainly wasn't showing any signs of the pressure getting to him after that race at Phillip Island. And as you said, Lewis, he has had a really decent record here. I think this was the first true time that we saw him fighting for the podium positions in Moto2 in his first year, back in, was that 2022?
Yeah.
It was, when he was with Grassini. It was the first time where you thought, okay, he's stepped up from being a kind of edge of the top 10 rider to potentially being a rider in the podium fight. So this place has brought some good memories for him in years gone by.
The crashes that he had, because he also had a crash in the end of practice on Friday afternoon, what they particularly costed him was dry running, because of course we saw on the Saturday morning mainly wet, certainly mixed conditions, pre-practice 2 session. So those who did have crashes or problems on Friday were really penalised as the weekend unfolded. We could see something rather similar in terms of a weather pattern this weekend. Of course, temperatures, as you can imagine, significantly hotter than they were in Phillip Island, where the thick end of 15 to 20 degrees hotter in terms of air temperature. Of course, track temperature we're expecting to be very much into the high 40s, if not the 50s of track temperature by the time we get to practice this afternoon, even with the cloud cover we have here in Sepang. And it is going to provide a very different kind of challenge of both man and machine than we saw in Australia a week or so ago. Early stage in this free practice one session, but it's certainly looking a lot better at this early juncture than it was at any stage in Australia for the Boscoscuro contingent. Tony Arbolino, Jake Dixon and Philip Salac, your 1, 2, 3, Ethan Guevara and Ivan Altola on their Boscoscuros 6th and 7th. And is, I guess, that one of the perhaps big surprises or one of the big disappointments of the Australian Grand Prix, a circuit that Boscoscuro pretty much owned in previous years, did last weekend.
Yeah, they were well off the one day. I mean, Jake Dixon up there inside the top 6 with a 5th place finish. He was, just a second off, second place, so it was...
you need to look at the other Boscoscuros just to understand how good a ride that was.
Exactly, yeah. Jake was 10 places higher and 15 seconds faster over the full race distance than the next best placed Boscoscuro rider, who was Alonso Lopez, all the way down in 15th place. And we've been saying all weekend just what a star Alonso Lopez has been at Phillip Island in years gone by. 2022, so it was an early crash for Zonta van den Goorburg. Although that's down at turn number 9, that's claimed its first victim in this Moto2 class. So maybe a little bit before that, we've seen a second crash, I think, for even Altola.
Altola's gone down the corner before that by the looks of it, down at turn 8. And Van den Goorburg has made it one corner further round. There you can see right hand side of that Boscoscuro very much scuffed up. Well pleased the title sponsors. It is a right-hander into turn 8. The yellow flags are back out, I think, purely because Altola is trying to recover his bike onto the racetrack from there. I think we referenced turn 9 already as the corner where Ayagura crashed out of victory contention on the final lap in that 2022 battle. It is such a tough corner, scrubbing off speed down to around about 55 kilometres an hour on a Moto2 bike. This is turn 9 that Altola's rather battered Boscoscuro is making his way through. And we're now going to have a look at what happened to him into turn number 8. The number 4 who saw his 8-race point scoring streak come to an end last time out in Australia when he was certainly part of the Boscoscuro club who struggled so much. Altola finishing down in 18th place, not helped by being pushed off the road at turn 1. I think we're going to see the Van den Goorburg crash first. There he goes, front end washing away on the way into that first gear hairpin. And at the other end of that back straight, further back down the road, back into turn 8, which is just at the back of the picture there, is where we saw Altola go down.
Yeah, I feel we're going to see a few more of those crashes like the one Zonta van den Goorburg just suffered throughout this weekend. Turn 9 is a real problem spot through all the Grand Prix categories. That is pretty much a carbon copy of the crash that Ekabanyaya had, of course, in last year's sprint, which proved so costly in his World Championship defence. As we look into Celestino Vietti, we were just talking about the Boscoscuro's struggles and of Phillip Island, how it seems to be slightly different so far here this session with Boscoscuro's 1, 2 and 3. Dixon was saying all through the long corners in Phillip Island, just the lack of turning that he was experiencing was so pronounced compared to the Calixes. I think with this slightly softer tyre allocation, rear tyre allocation that Pirelli are bringing this year, it is as if the Boscoscuros just have too much grip and feels like the bike is almost being pushed towards the outside of the track through those long corners that we have at Phillip Island. And he was saying that the Calixes around him were pretty much able to just pick and choose their lines, whether it was around the outside of him or underneath him, especially through turn number 3, I think was a place where he was having particular difficulty. And that just persisted right the way through the race, and he was really gutted to have missed out on the podium. He felt that he was riding as well as he has done at any point during this season. He said to me afterwards it probably ranked among his best ever rides in the Moto2 class, and it was one that he had earmarked going into the weekend as a real chance to add to his winning tally in this category before he moves across the World Superbike next year. Real frustration there from Dixon, but you have to say he gave it absolutely everything, and to finish 15 seconds ahead of Alonso Lopez around a track that Lopez was previously so strong at. I think that tells the whole story.
Yeah, just to underline how badly Boscoscuro struggled, as Neil mentioned, there was 15 seconds between Dixon and Lopez. Those were your first and second Boscoscuros across the line. Lopez was the only other Boscoscuro point scorer last weekend, and the other Boscoscuros, with the exception of Harrison Voigt, of course, who was replacing the injured Unai Radre, they all finished together. Lopez, Guevara, Arbolino, Altola and Vietti were 15th to 19th. and all pretty much together on the racetrack. And of course the Speed RS Boscascuros of Chelsea Vietti and Alonso Lopez, well, they qualified way down the field. Vietti down in a season's low 25th place, his worst qualifying for 4 years. Jorge Navarro, last year's Malaysian Grand Prix pole sitter, has joined the Turn 9 club. Lopez only qualified a few positions higher up in 20th, only to secure that final point.
I think we could say Lopez and Vietti haven't been in brilliant form, but we've certainly seen flashes from both Arbolino and Guevara, the Pramac riders, in recent rounds to suggest that they're kind of at their best level this year. There is another turn 9. Slow speed get off for Jorge Navarro in front, just tucking way in there. And it does look as though there are a few damp patches still around this track, but times have actually been quite competitive so far in this session. Tony Arbolino's fastest time of a 2:05.2 is actually less than a second on Jorge Navarro's all-time lap record, which was set in qualifying last year. That's a 2:04.4, so the track must be in decent enough condition if we're already within a second of the all-time lap record.
Again, you referenced the softer Pirelli tyre allocation this season. They have gone much more aggressive this weekend than, of course, they were going to in Australia. Australia, one of the most savage circuits from a tyre point of view. Given the information that Pirelli had from this Grand Prix last year, they have felt compelled to bring up the development version of their super soft rear tyre here this weekend, in addition to the SC0, which is officially in the Pirelli allocation the soft tyre. It's the harder of the two rear allocations this weekend. We have the SC1 soft and the SC2 medium front tyre options available this weekend. As you can see, Vietti's front end chattering away a little bit on the bumps through the fast turn 5. It's already looking a little bit more positive for Vietti and Boscascuro than at any stage in Phillip Island. Of course, Vietti produced one of his great Grand Prix rides here 1 year ago. His first Grand Prix back from the injured shoulder that he sustained in Phillip Island, came back here and won the Malaysian Grand Prix.
Yeah, that was an absolutely insane performance from Vietti here 1 year ago. No one saw that coming. You can see Gonzalez getting a little bit out of shape coming through the final turn here, turn number 15. But all is okay, and Gonzalez has had a very steady start. Best of the Calic chassis so far in 5th place. Just for reference, Diogo Moreira down in 14th. So decent first 50 minutes of the session so far, the championship leader.
The other title contenders then, because we do still have 5 mathematically. Jake Dixon 57 points back. It's likely that he's going to drop out of mathematical contention this weekend. He really does need to win this Grand Prix and hope that Gonzalez and Moreira are off the podium to still be alive to Portimao in a fortnight's time. Dixon at the moment in 2nd place. Barry Baltus, who produced one of the rides of the Sunday without question in Phillip Island. Baltus on the number 7 is currently down in 19th place. He's 42 points back, so may well keep himself mathematically in contention at the end of this weekend, but perhaps won't go to Valencia with still a say in the championship conversation. Cadet 35 points to Prix, so he's still just about on the fringes of this Moto2 title battle. He's currently 8th in this session, with, as Neil mentioned, Moreira and Gonzalez currently 14th and 6th respectively. Here's a look at the Navarro crash. Pushing front away into turn number 9. Having to brake and sort of turn on the angle while you're still braking into turn number 9. Second of what will be several riders to go down there already this weekend. As mentioned, Navarro was on pole position here for the Malaysian Grand Prix a year ago when he was a substitute at the American racing team. A weekend and a performance which certainly contributed to him getting a full-time spot on this grid again for 2025.
Yeah, that was a real bolt from the blue. We had American racing 1-2 on the grid last year with Navarro first, Marcos Ramirez in 2nd, and both riders inside the top 6 on Sunday. This has been something of a good track for Marcos Ramirez in years gone by, but Navarro having a tricky start to the weekend, as has much of his season been, unfortunately. It's been nothing to really write home about. Navarro just 2 points scoring finishes all year long. Riding to finish 2nd here last year, as Lewis said, so really not been going to plan for the Clinton Ford factory team. You were just mentioning some of the championship contenders there, Lewis, prior to that, and just want to give a quick shout out to Barry Baltus, because what a ride he enjoyed at Phillip Island. Baltas, we didn't really mention it during the Australian Grand Prix, but he had been sick as a dog in Indonesia. Really bad case of food poisoning, which had just knocked him for 6. Wasn't able to eat for 3 days when he was in Mandalika, and somehow he managed to come home in 4th in that particular race. He said he was still feeling well off colour in Australia, or more than a week later. He was obviously able to eat, take fluids on board again, but still wasn't feeling it as 100%. Baltas had an absolute nightmare opening to the Grand Prix. Found himself all the way down in 2nd place at the end of the first lap. Yeah, he came through in real swashbuckling fashion, and his rhythm towards the end suggested that maybe if he had got away well at the start, maybe qualified a little bit better than he had done in 10th position, potentially be the one rider that may have taken the fight to second agency. He certainly told that to me after the race. He said, if I qualified better, I think I could have fought for victory today. But the fact that he came up in 6th when he was back in 22nd so early on was quite the turnaround.
Yeah, he found himself on the outside of turn 1. It was he and Ivan Altola who were sort of boxed wide through Doon Corner. And as Neil mentioned, Baltas was 22nd in the first lap. In terms of the time that he lost, well, at the end of the first lap, Barry Baltas was 4.6 seconds off the race lead. He only ended the race at 5.3 seconds off the race lead. Now, there of course were some caveats to throw into that. Center Aegis said he wasn't pushing on the final lap, would have won by slightly more than he did, had he not been sort of taking in the adulation, quite rightly, of his home crowd on the final lap. But of course, you also have to factor into that fact that Barry Baltas was overtaking a bunch of people part way through that Grand Prix. So I think at the very least, it's realistic to say that Barry Baltas would have been in that battle for 2nd place, and might well have finished 2nd in the Grand Prix had he come through the first lap somewhere near where he started in 10th place. Without question, there was a podium there for Baltas, and had he achieved it, then we would have been talking about Barry Baltas potentially going up ahead of Aaron Canet to 3rd in the World Championship, and still a real contender with 3 races to go. Certainly feels that it's probably going to run out of time from Baltas' point of view to still fight for the championship, but the very fact that we're having that conversation at the 20th round of 22 this season, and Barry Baltas still being a Moto2 championship contender, just underlines the quantum leap forward that he has taken in 2025. Could still finish ahead of his panting teammate Aaron Canet to take a 3rd place in the World Championship.
Yeah, top 3 in the championship for Baltas would be an enormous achievement from where he finished last year. Baltas was, what, 21st overall championship in 2024?
Propped up a lot by the points he got in Qatar.
Exactly. I think there was this crazy run between the first race of last year and maybe the 15th or 16th race. 4 points between Qatar and whatever the 16th race of the season was. There was this crazy run where he was obviously going through a lot of issues off the track, and yeah, just not very competitive on it either. And yeah, what a turnaround it has been for Baltas. I did not think we would be talking about him as even an outside championship contender, honestly speaking, at any point in his career. Really, he hasn't done a great deal to show that he would be capable of that in years gone by, yet he has really been the revelation of Moto2 in 2025. As we take a look at the rider that is currently fastest, Tony Arbolino down in his box. Always have 1 or 2 uncomfortable moments under braking. As Lewis said, this has been a decent place for Arbolino in years gone by. A winner here in 2022 in Moto2, and was also up inside the top 5 at the end of play last year. So we can say, I think that Arbolino does go well here, does enjoy this track, and Boston had some decent performances here in years gone by. Remember, Aldeguer is absolutely devastating the dominant romp to victory in 2023. The same day in which Pedro Acosta wrapped up that year's championship. So there's a reason to believe that Arbolino could be on for a good weekend here.
We've seen some Moto2 title glory here over the years, not just in 2023 with Pedro Acosta, but back in 2019, of course, Alex Marquez clinching the Moto2 crown right here.
Before that with Pecco Bagnaia.
Indeed. Pecco Bagnaia in the costume change, and he couldn't get his bike started, could he, in the celebrations after the race. Azumi Sasaki has had a bit of an uncomfortable ride through turn 13. As he's now explaining to the team exactly how that felt on board the bike. He's another rider who deserves a shout out from the Australian Grand Prix. Sasaki taking the best qualifying in his Moto2 career, backing it up with the top 10. He was firmly in that podium battle, wasn't he, in the early stages, until arm pump struck for the 2nd Grand Prix Sunday in a row.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been been a bit of an issue for Yumu in the last couple of weeks. But what a brilliant ride that was. The first time we've seen Yumu after a fight for the podium in the Moto2 class. And yeah, bumped into his girlfriend Mercedes just after the race, and she was telling me that the arm pump has been really quite pronounced in the last couple of Grand Prix and has really caused him to drop off towards the end of the races. We saw that in Philippines where he was up in 5th or 6th and then dropped down to eventually finish in 10th. They think it's obviously too late now to undergo arm pump surgery before the end of the season, so they want to keep trying and basically just go in the distance until Valencia, and then they'll have some surgery maybe in later November, or once pre-season testing in November is finished in December. So yeah, Yumu was straight to the Chiron clinic after the race to get some treatment on his arm, because I think it really had gone quite numb in some respects. But great to see Yumu starting to look like a proper contender in the Moto2 class, because at one point you did worry that maybe it wasn't just going to work out for him. There were a couple of rumours earlier this season linking him back to a seat in the Moto3 category, but I think we can safely say in the second half of this season that he's taken a big step forward, and we're starting to see the best of Yumu like we saw in Moto3.
Score a point this season until Hassan has been a fairly regular point scorer since then. Points finishes in Australia, Indonesia, Japan, Mizano, the last 4 Grand Prix, Austria and Spring, also points finishes since he opened his account back in the Netherlands. Just a word on his teammate, by the way, it's on to Van den Goldberg. He is back out on circuit now after going down the road in turn 9. Fellow crasher early on in the session, as you just saw. Ivan Altola was also back on the racetrack. As we're keeping an eye on Van den Goldberg's sector times, I think it was just a glimpse of him we saw in the back of the picture. He's on course at the moment to get himself right into the top 10 at this stage. It's still Arbolino, Dixon and Vietti, your Boscoscuro 1, 2, 3 across 3 different teams. Blue Crew Pramac from Mark VDS from Speed RS. Danny Munoz for the Red Bull KTM IO team, who won this Grand Prix with Vietti last year, 4th, from Philippe Salach, 5th, who has put in 9 laps this morning. It's just right about in line with what everyone else has been doing, so there's certainly no immediate signs of Salach struggling with his shoulder. We'll hopefully get some further information from him as we go through the day, how he is feeling. Gonzalez, the points leader, 6th. Mohamed Arena, Sarrington, Ethan Guevara and David Alonso in 10th place. Joe Moreira can shuffle back to 15th place now. He is the 2nd off the pace.
Yeah, but let's not judge Moreira currently, because we know we normally see him get better as the weekend continues. We are 25 minutes into this session. I think we deserve, the race winner from last time out probably deserves a bit of a mention, don't you think, Lewis? Because we obviously touched on the fact that Senna Ages had a pretty comfortable ride to victory this home Grand Prix, but just dwelling on that for a minute, what a performance that was. Just the kind of control that he was able to assert on the pack from, what, I think about 6 or 7 laps in. The way he pulled away, I mean, he made it look so easy and so comfortable. I was not expecting him to win. I was certainly expecting him to fight for victory, but I thought he would have to work a lot harder for it than he eventually had to do.
I think the main thing he had to adjust to and understand was the wind on the Sunday in Phillip Island. It was certainly buffeting the riders. It was perhaps at his most strongest during the Moto3 race that preceded it, but he did have a couple of moments into Dual Corner, turn 1. The pretty strong tailwind there was really pushing the riders in to that first corner, but certainly once the battle unfolded behind him, Agius was comfortably in a class of his own. The winning margin at the end over David Alonso was 3.6 seconds, but in truth he was a lot stronger than that might indicate. When you go through the closing laps of the Grand Prix, his lead was over 5 seconds before he backed off on the final lap. Said it was such an incredible experience that he lost his voice on the in-lap. He was screaming the whole way around the in-lap as he was taking in the applause and appreciation of his home fans. Was the first Australian ever to win the Moto2 Motorcycle Grand Prix of Australia. Of course, there have been many Aussies who give it a good go in the intermediate class. They're just breaking new ground and underlining that, with another year's experience under his belt heading into 2026, excuse me. There's absolutely no reason why Agius can't be looking at 2026 as a season where he can aim that level on a more consistent basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when Senna has been on it this year, it really has been something to write home about. picked up his first victory in Silverstone and then backed that up in Phillip Island. And well, a couple of things were really impressive. Namely, the fact that on Friday afternoon, as we were saying, throughout the weekend in Australia, Senna was clearly faster than everyone else on longer runs. He was able to do laps in the 1 minute 30s, when everyone else was dropping off slightly and into the 1 minute 31s. And knowing that from Friday must have put a huge amount of pressure on his shoulders. Yeah, it didn't really seem to affect him at all throughout the rest of the weekend. Sometimes riders talk about that moment where they look at the timesheets at the end of the session and they think, oh wow, I'm way faster than everyone else. I remember Jake Dixon talking about this at Aston in 2022 when he eventually won his first Grand Prix and said, kind of weight of expectation, and suddenly you start putting on your shoulders thinking, this is my chance. And it didn't really affect him at all as Dixon has just jumped up to the top of the timesheets. And
a new all-time lap record in Prix Practice 1 for Jake Dixon. He's 8 tenths clear now of the field. He and Diogo Moreira have both gone out, I'm going to assume, on brand new rubber. This is the super soft rear tyre for Gonzalez, trying to catch the red banding on his rear tyre. Difficult spot when he's going at that speed, and Mona on the final corner clearly cost Gonzalez time as he goes into 4th place. But the goalpost has been moved significantly by Jake Dixon in this early stage of the weekend. 2:04.264. That is 10th and a half quicker than Jorge Navarro's pole time of a year ago.
yeah, so we're going to get the lap record absolutely slaughtered this weekend if this session is anything to go by, just as we saw in Phillip Island 1 week ago. Just going back, just to finish up on Atius quickly. He was saying that he had a conversation with Casey Stoner going into the Australian Grand Prix. I think he spoke to him on the Wednesday, and he said to Casey, yeah, it's a big weekend ahead. And Casey said, don't think of it like that, just think of it as any other weekend. And he said, it's super important to have a really good Friday. And Casey said, yeah, but if it doesn't go well, don't worry, it's okay, you can always amend that on Saturday. I think having Casey's experience and wisdom really just helped Senna take a bit of a deep breath and not put too much on the fact that it was his own Grand Prix and treat it like any other.
Back with Dixon then into turn 14, which is famous for absolutely nothing in Grand Prix history. Honestly, nothing of note has ever happened at that particular corner in the past. Jake Dixon making his way then into the final corner, which was reprofiled around about 7 or 8 years ago. It's now a negative camber final hairpin. So a variety of lines are taken here. Dixon taking a very late apex here. The negative camber sliding towards the outside of the racetrack. Dixon, is he close to the 203s here? He is very close at 204.131 now. His advantage 7 tenths over Albert Arenas. Diogo Moreira, as it stands, is the only other rider within a second of the 96.
Yeah, pretty impressive flexes from Dixon at the end of FP1. He was pretty fast right out of the blocks, but once he's stuck in that super soft rear tyre, I assume he's put on the super soft rear tyre, he is absolutely annihilated the rest of the field. Let's see if Manny Gonzalez can narrow that gap down ever so slightly. He jumps up into 3rd, but still Albert Arenas 7 tenths off in 2nd position, so Dixon in a bit of a class of his own as it stands. He doesn't have the happiest of memories here from a year ago, does he? This is a race that he would rather forget after he miscalculated the number of laps in last year's race. Thought he had secured 3rd place, and yeah, was mortified to realise that yeah, there was still 1 lap to go.
Perhaps in fairness to Dixon, they put that down to a slightly faulty dash, which gave him some incorrect information as the race was coming to a close. At least from an asphalt point of view, his slip-up did at least hand the podium to his teammate at the time, Ethan Guevara, who was the grateful recipient of that 3rd place. And here is the 96. Closing in once again on Moreira. Moreira 4th now, should I say. Gonzalez has taken 3rd place from him on that last lap. Gonzalez now into the 2:04s. Check on Aaron Cadet, 3rd in the World Championship. He's in 12th place at the moment. And certainly at this stage hasn't put on a brand new tyre or hasn't set any laps on a brand new tyre. He is just starting his first time lap on his current run. So we might see the 44 launch himself up the order very shortly. So Lopez now enters turn 1. Lopez into his final 3 Grand Prix now on board a Boscoscuro, and he moves over to the Grassini squad on board a Calex for next season. And certainly the recent trend of results would indicate that Lopez is pretty pleased to see the back of that Boscoscuro chassis. He's been in qualifying 1 in the last 3 Grand Prix now as Lopez, eliminated in it in the last 2.
Yeah, it hasn't been in the top 10 in any of the last 4 races, which we've been saying it all year for a rider that was fighting for the championship, even if he was always slightly doing so from an outside position last year. It has been a very underwhelming season for the number 21. Did miss a decent chunk of pre-season with quite a nasty and finicky finger injury, and really since then we haven't seen the best of him at any point this season. I feel that Boscoscuro's overall lack of competitiveness has hit him probably harder than anyone else on the Boscoscuro roster.
Going to crash in turn 3 by the looks of it, or maybe on the exit of 2. Yellow flags are out in the first sector. Usually if you crash on the way out of 2, it's a high side. You certainly want to be going down through turn 3, which is one of the fastest corners. In fact, is the fastest corner around this circuit. It's Joe Roberts who has gone down, and it is in turn 3. His teammate Marcos Ramirez certainly notched up a pretty hefty crash bill for the American racing team last weekend. And Joe Roberts, who had just set his personal best moments before that and gone up to 11th place, he's gone down. He's gone down in the heart of turn 3. That's 4th gear at around 175 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, as you said, Lewis, somewhere that you do not want to be falling on this Sepang International circuit. And let's hope that Joe is okay. The last thing that he will want is another injury going in to an off-season like the one he suffered last year. So fingers crossed for the American down there at turn number 3. Somewhere that you really don't see riders falling very often, is it, Lewis? Turn 1 and turn 2 are certainly problem points on this track, but turn 3 very much left, so you can see the yellow flags still waving there. We have the likes of Manu Gonzalez going into this sector, and there is Joe Roberts, and that is it's clearly been a big one. He is being stretchered away. And this is what happened up at the top of your shot.
He's high-sided out of 2, hasn't he? He's lost it out of 2, lands hard on his back there. Of course, we caught up in the bike at one stage as well. And Jake Dixon, that will have taken the air out of his lungs, and I think he was immediately favouring his hand there when he got up, clearly recognising immediately that he'd heard something. Stretched away from the scene, so we hope that Joe Roberts is okay as a result of that. We saw that he was conscious, but clearly in an awful lot of pain.
Yeah, understandably so. Fingers crossed for Joe. It's been a bit of a rough session. There's been plenty of crashes, hasn't there? It's been a very fast session, but also plenty of crashes to start the weekend off here at the Sepang International Circuit. None more heavy than that suffered by Joe Roberts. I mean, it was initially just a bit of a rear end slide, but the fact that he then got caught up with the bike as it got ever more out of shape, that was pretty ugly to see. So let's hope that the American is okay. Okay to take part in the rest of this weekend.
In amongst all of that, we've seen Albert Arenas close the gap on Jake Dixon now down to a 10.5. Arenas has found a 2:04.292, which is also under the old lap record. Moreira, who we're now looking at, is into 3rd now, 2:04.5 from Morgado, Arbolino and Jeanette Gonzalez. Shuffle back down to 7th place now. Still very early stages of the weekend though, so no one in intact will be panicking too much. The greatest concern at this stage of the weekend will be Senna Aegis' relatively modest start to the session. Aegis down in P20 at the moment on a 2:05.776. He's 1.6 seconds off the pace. Aegis perhaps not with the greatest experience around this Sepang circuit. He did race here last year, but didn't make it to the end of the first lap when he was taken out by Alberto Sura into turn 9 on lap 1.
Yeah, it was just a shot of team manager Jürgen Ling there on our screens. I do seem to recall Jürgen telling us last year that perhaps it was just a little bit difficult after the previous year's success at Philippano when Senna took his first ever Moto2 podium to come here, and yeah, it was a tricky weekend for the Australian. It's been a bit of a slow start here in FP1, but we are still talking about the first session of the weekend. It's still very much early days, and yeah, that one relative lack of experience up against many of his rivals on the grid here. Senna would have raced here in the Asian Talent Cup back in the day, but yeah, maybe not as much Grand Prix experience as some of the riders we see at the top of the time sheets.
3 minutes of this session remain then. Let's see if the last year's winner comes our way. A sizable straight here to bookend the lap. This is the run from 14 up to the negative camp at 15. See once again there, VFD giving the side of the track. Plenty of space, you can see there too. Good view there from the shot, just making your way through the corner of just how much the camber pulls away from the inside of the corner. He now takes the fifth, 2:04.644. Actually, he's up from the mobile 2 in this session, up into P12. Actually's weekend in Australia was very much compromised by a grid penalty that dropped him down to 19th on the grid and found himself in the wrong group entirely during the Grand Prix, which cost him some points. Here are your top two from a week ago, 81 and 80. It's Alonso who goes up ahead of Senna and Agius. Alonso on course to move himself well into the top 10 with this, down in 24th place at the moment, perhaps a little scrappy on the way out of the final corner, which brings Agius right onto his tail again. How much time does that cost Alonso? Not much, as it happens, up into third place.
Yes, two Aspar rookies right in the mix at this early stage of the weekend. Alonso in third, Holgado in fifth. In fact, make that fourth. Holgado's just approved again, and it's been a crash for both of the MSI bikes in this session. We saw even Artola crashing earlier on in this session, and now Harrison Hoyt, the number 29, has fallen coming through turn number 4. Thankfully that was a front end crash rather than a rear end crash coming out of turn number 4, and Harrison is straight back up on his feet after checking his right glove, make sure everything is okay. It's a old experience for Harrison back at his home Grand Prix a week ago, having to learn a completely new bike. Rides a Calac chassis in the European Moto2 Championship as opposed to the Boston which he's currently on. To have to learn a new frame during a weekend when weather is really up and down and you're only really having about 2 full dry sessions to test it out before you jump into the race. I mean, he is up against the 1 week going into Sunday there.
The hope is that Unai Radre, the regular in that team now, of course after the early season split with Sergio Garcia, the hope is that he'll be back in Portimao in a couple of weeks' time. He was essentially given a couple of races to rest up an injury that he aggravated in Mitengi. He is fighting for the European Moto2 Championship at the moment, so to give him the best possible opportunity to be fully fit for their next round, which comes in a week's time. Radre given a couple of Grand Prix off. Alonso looks to close the gap still further to Dixon up at the front. We have seen now on 2 of the faster flowing circuits of the calendar, 2 of the riders circuits, as they say. David Alonso really has stepped up and stepped forward in that Aspar team. Confirmation once again, he really has come to grips with his early season qualifying woes and his perhaps difficulties early in the Grand Prix on a brand new tyre. Last 3 Grand Prix on the front 2 rows of the grid. And of course he crashed out of the sort of podium battle in Indonesia and has finished 4th and 2nd in the 2 Grand Prix either side of that. So Alonso certainly cemented himself as a frontrunner in Moto2, although it looks like it has come a little too late for Alonso to snatch the Rookie of the Year prize from this man, Danny Holgado. Holgado 166 points to his name. He is 49 clear of his teammate David Alonso, which means that if Danny Holgado scores 2 points here this weekend in Malaysia, or 2 points, should I say more than Alonso, then Holgado will be crowned Rookie of the Year this weekend.
You would have to say that will be a formality in the final 3 races. Gonzalez a little bit scruffy on the corner exit coming out of turn number 14 onto the back straight. Inside the top 7 or 8 positions. In fact, it is 10, so he improves the time, but not in position. And it's certainly not a swashbuckling start to the weekend for the number 18, the championship leader. Potentially be slightly concerned with the fact that he's about 5 places, 0.3 of a second off Diogo Moreira at the end of play.
Well, we normally, as you say, it's a bit of a calling card for Manu Gonzalez to go there in pre-practice 1 and immediately lay down the gauntlet to his opposition. Can't say he's necessarily done that this morning. Jake Dixon perhaps would more fit that description with his performance so far today. What about title chasers? Gonzalez, third of the, well, 4 of them, or 4th of the 5 of them, depending on how you feel about Jake Dixon's prospects from here on in, behind both Dixon, Moreira and this man Aaron Cadet.
I don't want to say too much too soon, but if this continues, I would say the alarm bells might start ringing in Manu Gonzalez's ears. To be off at Phillip Island, which has never been his track in the past, is one thing, but to be off it here at Sepang, where he has previously very strong record. I think that would maybe start to be a point of concern. But as we say, Friday morning, we can't always read a great deal into these results.
And he will be watching the weather forecast very, very closely. One thing Manu Gonzalez does not want at this stage of the championship battle is a rain-affected practice session later on.
Yeah, that's a very good point indeed. Rain conditions have been his Achilles heel in 2025. He's gradually got a little bit better through the year, but by no means would you say he's one of the more competitive riders. But what a great session that was for Jake Dixon. A week on from one of his best ever Moto2 rides, in his own words, at Phillip Island. Didn't quite yield the podium finish there, but he's come out swinging here this weekend with a new crash helmet, and has pulverised the previous lap record by a couple of tenths of a second. A 2:04.1 is a new Moto2 lap record. Dixon, a tenth of a second clear of this rider here, Albert Arenas, at the end of play.
He's also been talking quite tough recently. He feels he's had the pace in recent rounds to pick up a podium, but for various reasons hasn't quite come to pass. The main reason being poor qualifying. Hasn't qualified on the front 3 rows in the last 4 rounds, but has certainly in the last 3 made up ground in the Grand Prix itself. Arenas through 10th to 5th in Indonesia, 11th up to 8th in Australia, and he was on the back of that podium group, right behind Manu Gonzalez and the checkered flag, but after that poor qualifying, left it way too late in the end. So Arenas already serving notice that he could be in the fray this weekend, and of course, as we've discussed this season, in the Moto2 campaign where we've seen 16 different riders stand on the podium and 10 different winners, it's not just going to be a straight battle between the title contenders. There are plenty who might want to interfere with the World Championship contenders this weekend. Jake Dixon with a new all-time lap record, top 3 practice 1 then, ahead of Albert Arenas and David Alonso. Daniel Holgado completing a 3-4 for Aspar. Your first genuine title contender, Diogo Moreira 5th from Chelsea Vietti, Tony Arbolino and Aaron Knecht. Ethan Guevara, podium finish hero a year ago, 9th, and points leader Manu Gonzalez completing the top 10. Barry Baltus, who's still a title contender, mathematically 11th ahead of Philip Salat, whose shoulder did make it through this first session of the weekend in one piece within a second of the pace. Crashes in that session for Jorge Navarro, Zonta van den Goorberg, Ivan Artola and Harrison Boyd. Of course, that big fall for Joe Roberts, who we wish the very best to. But it's Jake Dixon who tops 3 practice 1 here in Sepang. And we'll begin our MotoGP weekend in a moment with their 3 practice 1 session coming your way next. Qualifying left it way too late.
And has pulverised the previous lap record by a couple of tenths. That's a very good point indeed. Rain conditions have been his Achilles heel in 2025. He's gradually got a little bit better through the year, but by no means would you say he's one of the more competitive riders. What a great session that was for Jake Dixon. We gone from one of his best ever Moto2 rides, in his own words, at Phillip Island. Didn't quite yield the podium finish there, but he's come out swinging here this weekend with a new crash helmet, and has pulverised the previous lap record by a couple of tenths of a second. A 2:04.1 is a new Moto2 lap record. Dixon, a tenth of a second clear of this rider here, Albert Arenas, at the end of play.
He's also been talking quite tough recently. He feels he's had the pace in recent rounds to pick up a podium, but for various reasons hasn't quite come to pass. The main reason being poor qualifying. Hasn't qualified on the front 3 rows in the last 4 rounds, but has certainly in the last 3 made up ground in the Grand Prix itself. Arenas through 10th to 5th in Indonesia, 11th up to 8th in Australia, and he was on the back of that podium group, right behind Manu Gonzalez and the checkered flag, but after that poor qualifying, left it way too late in the end. Arenas already serving notice that he could be in the fray this weekend, and of course, as we've discussed this season, in the Moto2 campaign where we've seen 16 different riders stand on the podium and 10 different winners, it's not just going to be a straight battle between the title contenders. There are plenty who might want to interfere with the World Championship contenders this weekend. Jake Dixon with a new all-time lap record, top 3 practice 1 then, ahead of Albert Arenas and David Alonso. Daniel Holgado completing a 3-4 for Aspar. Your first genuine title contender, Diogo Moreira, 5th from Chelsea Vietti, Tony Arbolino and Aaron Canet. Ethan Guevara, podium finish here a year ago, 9th, and points leader Manu Gonzalez completing the top 10. Barry Baltus, who's still a title contender, mathematically 11th ahead of Philip Salat, whose shoulder did make it through this first sessional weekend in one piece, within a second of the pace. Crashes in that session for Jorge Navarro, Zonta van den Goorberg, Ivan Artola and Harrison Boyd. Of course, that big fall for Joe Roberts, who we wish the very best to. But it is Jake Dixon who tops Prix Practice 1 here in Sepang. And we'll begin our MotoGP weekend in a moment with their Prix Practice 1 session coming your way next.
MotoGP is back in Southeast Asia to complete an intense tour of 4 flyway races in 5 pivotal weeks after a cool weekend on the Phillip Island coast. MotoGP is the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur with the Grand Prix Malaysia, where we head back to Europe to complete a record-breaking campaign. We're all set for a sensational weekend in the 25th Sepang Showdown with FP1. Next live, it's time for MotoGP. A relatively cool pit lane at the moment. As you'll see, there's rather heavy cloud cover circulating above this Sepang International Circuit. Well, this was the news that Ducati feared, which Mark